2. The young girl reminisces with her friends. Standing before Cruz's temple of Asfar for the first time in several months, Latina hesitated a bit as she looked up at the door. For some reason, she had frozen up and felt somehow embarrassed. Even though she was intimately familiar with the place, she felt strangely unsettled. They're both Asfar temples, but it really is completely different from Master's place, she whispered, once more becoming aware of that fact. She nodded in understanding, thinking about how there were all kinds of things in the world that she didn't understand. While she was musing on such things, trying to take her mind off her meaningless embarrassment, a familiar voice called out to her from behind. Latina. Chloe. Joy and relief washed over Latina's face as she turned around. The instant she saw her friend, the oppressive feelings weighing down her heart lifted. Welcome home. I'm real glad to see that you're looking fine. I'm looking forward to hearing all kinds of stories. Right. Latina's back, Chloe. As a result, when Latina walked through the door alongside Chloe, her expression was back to normal, and it was hard to tell that several months had passed. They passed through the polished hallway, heading for their assigned classroom. A fairly large number of children from all over Cruz learned here, so when they entered their second year, they were split into separate classrooms. Advanced schooling was held in a separate building, but since they shared a library and other such facilities, the younger students occasionally passed by the older children. The classroom was overflowing with natural light and had a bright, open feel to it. The benches and desks were lined up systematically, but there were no assigned seats. Even so, over time the students naturally ended up always sitting in the same places. Long time no see, Latina. Latina's glad that you're doing well, Sylvia. It's been the same as always in Cruz. Nothing ever changes. Another of their friends was already in the classroom. Latina's expression grew even brighter upon seeing Sylvia for the first time in a while. Paying no heed to Latina's reaction, Sylvia leaned forward at her own pace. Her green eyes sparkled, as if to show her overflowing curiosity. More importantly, tell me about your trip. Chloe already told me the basic route you took. How much equipment and food did you take? Were there really a lot of magical beasts? Also, Latina knew that Sylvia, who had divine protection from Outdar, was fascinated by traveling, so she responded with a troubled smile. It's hard to answer all that at once. Latina sat in the seat in front of Sylvia and turned around. She chose this spot rather than sitting beside both Chloe and Sylvia was because it was easier to talk this way. The three rotated their seats so the person who sat in front changed each day. Latina saw a lot of magical beasts when we first went into the forest, Latina replied. Were you all right? Chloe asked in concern. Ooh, what type? Sylvia questioned, letting her curiosity show. Dale was super strong, so it was totally fine. Latina learned defensive magic too, so she helped out. You fought too, Latina? Latina just helped a little. Dale would have been fine on his own too. Weren't you scared? When Latina was there in the past before she came to Cruz, she was really afraid. But having Dale with her, she wasn't scared at all. While talking about her guardian like that, her expression was full of trust and affection. Seeing Latina look like that, as always, Chloe and Sylvia broke out in somewhat awkward smiles. Magical beasts didn't show up near the highway. We did see them sometimes after entering the mountains, though. And we did run into robbers once. That's awful. Chloe's reaction was the obvious one. However, Latina tilted her head a bit and matter-of-factly and readily responded, Dale caught them all with magic and then contacted a nearby village, and we were done with them. They were less scary than the magical beasts. Dale and Latina encountered the robbers shortly after they started walking along the coastal highway. It was an important road for distribution, along which goods were carried from Quail to all over. In addition to travelers, there were a great number of merchants and caravans that traveled along it. There were a lot of concealed paths off into forests around there, but Dale hadn't heard of any robbers showing up there from the information he had gathered ahead of time. Latina was the one who realized their presence first. Dale, what is it? Latina tugged on his sleeve, a worried frown on her face. Dale was confused by her actions and she started to say something but instead moved close to him, looking like she didn't know what to do. "Is something wrong?" Latina has a bad feeling," she whispered, standing on her tiptoes and bringing her mouth to his ear, taking care so that no one else would hear. "A bad feeling? Yeah, from over there. In that forest." Dale stopped walking and stared in the direction she had indicated. He didn't doubt Latina's ability, so he was just stopping to check for himself. Because Latina had told him there was something there, he was able to perceive a presence he never would have noticed otherwise. Over there, huh? It was quite far away. Even for Dale, it was exceedingly difficult to sense the men hiding in the forest holding their breath. They may have had a scout on lookout, but they wouldn't even be considering the possibility that they'd been noticed by Dale and Latina from so far off. Well, I can't blame them. They weren't aiming for Dale and Latina to start with, and the distance between them was enough that it was illogical to even consider them as targets. Nobody would think to pay such attention to them when they were nothing more than a few of the countless passers-by. Dale looked over the highway, and his eyes stopped on a single horse-drawn wagon. It wasn't an especially extravagant carriage, but even so, it was quite well built. It had been attentively maintained too. At a glance it appeared plain, but he could tell that a good bit of money had been spent on it. In other words, it was likely the carriage of a merchant with a steady income. He assumed that wagon was the robber's current target. "How should I handle this?" he muttered, considering his options. He wasn't the type to be a good Samaritan, walking around saving each and every complete and utter stranger he came across. To Dale, making sure Latina was safe came first. It wouldn't do at all to get involved in some trouble, only for it to lead to Latina being put in danger. If they hurried and passed on through, he could just claim to know nothing about it. But if Latina learned about it and became disillusioned, that'd be a problem. What was wrong with wanting to be a good person when he was in front of Latina? A single "Dale, you're so cool" from Latina would be far more valuable to him than the praise and admiration of society at large. Dale? But still, he wanted to avoid getting into a fight while Latina was watching. She may not have even flinched when fighting magical beasts, but he couldn't imagine she'd want to see people getting hurt, or even dying, depending on the circumstances. He couldn't imagine people aiming to commit a robbery would be that considerate though. It was entirely possible that the attack would occur right in front of Latina's eyes. That would hurt Latina greatly, deeply saddening her. And that would be no laughing matter. He got the feeling that it'd be better to deal with that source of potential sorrow sooner rather than later. "Should I crush them? Huh?" Latina responded to Dale's ominous whisper with a blink of surprise. Before moving in towards the robbers, Dale had Latina put up her hood. She was such a cute, beautiful little girl that even seeing her just once would leave quite an impression. Even though the chances were slim, he couldn't risk them harboring a grudge against her. Now that Latina's face was hidden, he had her lead the horses. She walked slowly down the highway. Meanwhile, Dale sprinted. He greatly closed the distance before the robbers had a chance to notice his sudden movements. As he ran, he tempered his mana and chanted a spell. "O earth and the spirits dwelling within you, by my name of Dale Recce, I order you." The arrows the robbers unleashed in the chaos weren't coming at a trajectory he needed to worry about. He avoided them without any need for haste. In order to deprive the enemy time to compose themselves, he fired off an arrow of his own from the gauntlet on his left arm. It was a warning shot, but there was no need to purposefully miss. "Shift your form according to my wishes and swallow up all around you." "Ground transfiguration," he chanted, finishing the spell. It was Dale's greatest specialty, earth magic. It wasn't a direct attack, rather, it was meant to control the field of battle on a large scale. And for Dale, when it came to earth magic, his mana wouldn't become exhausted, no matter how much he pumped into the spell. As a result, he was able to cast a transfiguration on such a large scale that a normal magic user could never handle it. A section of the forest vanished. Along with the ground itself, a ridiculous number of trees were swallowed by the abyss. Without a chance to even scream and having no clue of what was happening, the robbers fell to the bottom of the pit. It was a rather dirty move. Before the robbers that were left standing could realize what had happened, one of them was kicked into the hole. Another swung down his blade in a panic, only for it to be repelled by a gauntlet. Fearing a counterattack from his now compromised position as well as getting kicked, he distanced himself. However, it was then that Dale's magic activated. He had used a short shank, so it only caused a tiny bump to pop up out of the ground, but that was still enough to trip someone. For the finishing blow, Dale broke one of the man's legs so he couldn't move, then tossed him away. Sensing that everything was over, Latina suddenly peeked into the forest from the highway. "Dale, are you alright? You're not hurt, are you?" "I'm fine, Latina. You really are a kind girl." The expression he pointed her way made him look like a completely different person than the man who had coldly fought the robbers that were now in the hole. "You guys sure are lucky." He'd be fine just filling in the hole with them in it, but that would, of course, anger Latina. Rather than having some humane reason not to do it, he was just worried that it would have a negative effect on her upbringing. If he pulled his punches against such violent, unruly foes, he'd be the one who was in danger. Because Latina was nearby, Dale wanted to avoid making a cruel, blood-soaked scene, so he'd held back such that none of their lives would be in danger. Well, a few of them may have gotten crushed by trees, and he couldn't say they'd walk away with just minor injuries in that case, but it'd be fine since Latina couldn't see them down in the pit. "It's a pain, but I guess we'll go to a nearby village and request that they take care of them. There may have been a bounty or two amongst the group." Dale figured that'd at least serve to compensate him for the trouble. He urged Latina to follow him, and they returned to the highway. It wasn't scary at all. If the robbers in question were to hear that, they'd likely break down in tears, but that was truly how Latina felt. The danger she'd felt from the magical beasts had been much greater. "Latina has souvenirs for the two of you," she said, fishing two packages carefully wrapped in multiple layers of thin paper out of the bag she was holding and then passing them to Chloe and Sylvia. Upon peeling back the paper, they found small shellwork accessory cases. They'd been made by affixing mother-of-pearl to the case itself, so they gave off a gentle, sparkling light and were beautiful enough to catch the eye despite being small enough to be held in a single hand. "They're so pretty." "Thanks, Latina." Latina bought one for herself too. Each of them is a slightly different color. Chloe's was a faint cream, while Sylvia's was bluish. The one Latina had bought for herself, which was on display back in her room, was a pale pink. There were all sorts of things in quail. With a smile on her face, Latina spent the remaining time until the teacher arrived reminiscing about her time in the port town. Latina and Dale also stopped in Quail on their way back home. After renting a room in the same inn as before and dropping off their luggage, Dale said to Latina, "This time around, we'll take our time here. But today, we've got to focus on resting up properly rather than sightseeing." "Right," Latina energetically responded, after which she started rummaging about in the rucksack she always wore. Dale watched in confusion for a bit until she pulled out her wallet, apparently having tucked it away in an inside pocket. She started laying out her silver coins on the desk and counting them up. She hadn't purchased anything aside from what she needed for the trip up until now. As a result, she hadn't used up much of the money she had on hand. In La Band, the currency primarily used by the common masses consisted of copper and silver coins. When children went off to buy snacks, they'd do so grasping several copper coins tight in their hands. Silver coins were the largest amount needed to cover everyday living expenses. Most people never had an opportunity to use gold coins. Adventurers handled gold coins when receiving their rewards or paying for expensive equipment, but they didn't usually keep them in their wallets. And if you brought one out in your average store, you'd earn their ire for having to make change. As long as you weren't too far out in the country, it was exceptionally rare for people to hold on to their entire fortune. It was safer to keep it in the Azrak temples, and also more convenient. Seeing Latina finish lining up her silver coins, Dale let out a sigh. "You've got quite a bit there." As Latina had been getting paid for working at the Ocelot, she had more money than most girls her age, and since she was so sensible, there were no worries about her spending wastefully. As a result, she'd been steadily building up her savings, helping to secure her future. Latina'd like to buy souvenirs for Chloe and Sylvia, and Rita too. There are lots of pretty things for sale here in Quail, so she wants to go shopping. Got it. Let's go around the market tomorrow, then. Yeah? Last time they were in Quail, Latina had only shown interest in purchasing food. That had worried Dale a bit, but she'd apparently been that way only because they were heading out on their trip, not returning. Now that he saw her showing interest in things more appropriate for age, he felt somehow relieved. Latina was fond of both cute and sparkly things. Dale started mentally overlapping a map of Quail with a list of places he thought would make her happy to visit. After having such a conversation on their first day there, they turned in early. The next morning, they got out of bed a little later than usual, and after finishing breakfast at the inn, they headed out into town. So they didn't get lost in the crowd like last time, they held hands. Today, Latina let her hair run down her back after having spent the whole trip with it up so it wouldn't get in the way. She looked a bit more prim and proper than she normally did. "Should we have dinner at the Silent Seagull again tonight? Can we really? Or would you prefer to eat all sorts of stuff as we walk around and keep dinner light?" That sounds fun, too. This was apparently quite a difficult choice for Latina. She groaned as she thought it over with a serious expression on her face. Dale found it cute and his expression brightened. Even when she was troubled, Latina was still enjoying the trip. Not wanting to rush her decision, Dale held Latina's hand while slowly heading towards the ocean. As they walked along, they noticed the delicious scents drifting through the air from all over. The option of walking and eating was steadily growing more enticing. In the end, Latina fell to its temptation. With things as they were now, if they ended up restraining themselves so they could have a delicious dinner that night, they'd go crazy. Dale and Latina took a slightly different approach than they took last time they had walked around the market, which was still full of shops handling marine products. A great many travelers visited Quail, and quite a few of them were tourists. As a result, there were a lot of shops aimed at them, including stalls serving the town's famous seafood. Latina chewed away with all her might at the small shellfish skewer she'd bought from one such stall. As she was such a polite girl, she wasn't able to walk around and eat at the same time, so she and Dale stood off to the side of the road as she struggled with her food, which was tougher than it had first appeared. "I'll eat the rest, Latina. MMPH. Her mouth was still full of shellfish, so Latina responded by shaking her head. With her tiny stomach, even a single skewer would fill her up quite a bit. That would take away half the fun of walking around eating. Latina was shocked when she saw Dale easily gulp down the shellfish she'd been struggling with. "Should we buy something to drink?" "Yeah," Latina said with a nod. Dale took her to a nearby stall stocked with foreign fruits. The unfamiliar fruit juice they purchased was more refreshing than he had expected. While drinking his down, he handed one to Latina as well. With a big gulp, she at last succeeded at swallowing the shellfish in her mouth. She let out, finally able to breathe. She seemed to have surprised herself at how loud she was. She put her hands over her mouth and looked up at Dale in embarrassment. "It was tough. I see. They're still shellfish, but the ones over there are steamed in wine, so they're softer. Do you want to give it a try?" "Yeah? That sounds tasty." As they purchased the wine-steamed seafood with a scent of garlic, Dale started to want alcohol rather than juice. You never saw such foods around cruise, but when you were close to the sea, this sort of dish was often paired with drink. After seeing Dale use the shell to scoop the meat from the shellfish, Latina gave him a look of surprise and hurriedly tried to copy him. "It's yummy." As she chewed thoroughly, the umami flavor spread throughout her mouth. The garlic taste wasn't too strong, instead, it served as a nice accent. Latina was engrossed in eating the still hot meat, sucking in air to cool it down as she went. Dale was extremely satisfied as he watched. He could never grow tired of any of her little mannerisms. "How about we look for souvenirs for a while, and then we can stop to eat if anything else catches our eye?" "Yeah? This is a fun way to have a meal," Latina said with a smile, thoroughly enjoying herself. There were souvenir shops aimed towards tourists past the row of stalls. Both shops that handled small items and miscellaneous goods from other countries, as well as ones that focused on goods from La Bande, meant for serving foreign travelers and tourists. There are some fairly high-class inns and the like further down this road. Merchants and the more affluent commoners from other countries stay there. Latina sees. Nobles hardly ever stay there, though. Well, you might see some lower-ranking nobles there. In addition to stocking up, there are also plenty of customers who want souvenirs or other unusual goods. Looking around the marketplace was fun, but it's also nice to look into shops like this. Dale held Latina's hand tightly so she wouldn't go wandering all over in her excitement. "There are a lot of people around here, and you have to watch out for pickpockets, too," Dale warned, pointing a finger at her, and her expression seemed to be almost saying, "Whoops." As they walked along, they looked into one shop after another. Sure enough, Latina stopped at shops with cute girlish items on display. Not only that, but they'd stop in shops with countless suspicious folk crafts from other countries only to pick up something of unknown purpose and both laugh at it. After several shops, Latina decided on a ceramic doll for Rita's souvenir. It was a delicately crafted piece that Dale wouldn't have considered as a present for her. When the shopkeeper was carefully wrapping it up, Dale realized it was noisy out front. Dale and Latina looked at one another, then headed outside and proceeded towards the boisterous crowd. It wasn't an air of panic but rather pure curiosity. As a bundle of inquisitiveness herself, Latina was growing restless as well. The center of all the attention was a gorgeously dressed girl. From the garden maid with her, it was clear that she was from a rather well-off family. However, because of her impish behavior as she walked along with light steps peeking into shops as she went, it was hard to say for certain that she was a noble. It was proper to refer to her as a girl, as her appearance still had some childishness to it, and her neat and tidy outfit enveloped her slender form. She wore a casual dress that was too short to be called a gown, and further down, she had sturdy leather boots on her feet. In that attire, she clearly gave off a different image than sheltered, rich young ladies. The expression on her charming face shifted as she looked at one item after another in the store fronts. She was a girl who attracted the gaze of others. "That's the Rose Princess." Hearing Dale say that with a sigh, Latina tilted her head. "Dale, do you know her?" No, I've never met her. I've just heard rumors. But that's definitely her. Nobody else has a hair color like that." It wasn't just the girl's beautiful appearance that drew the gazes of those around her. The light reflected off of her sleek, long, shiny hair. What the light hit was a pale pink, while the portion in the shadows was rose. It was a vivid color of the sort that people didn't naturally have. "A monotrate?" Latina asked. "You sure are well informed. Did Master Cornelio teach you that?" "Yeah, he did. Back where Latina was born, someone had a monotrate. Those show up a lot in devils. The same is true of merfolk. Everyone in that race has strong water mana, after all. People who are born with strong mana have pretty colored hair and eyes and stuff, right?" "Is that the case with your hair, Latina?" Her hair was a beautiful, unusual color, so Dale had considered that possibility, but this was the first time he'd actually asked her. However, Latina shook her head back and forth in response. Latina's mana isn't strong, and her hair is the same as Reg's. "It's hereditary," she answered readily. Like how animals with strong mana became far more threatening magical beasts, mana could have an effect on a great many things. Mana traits came in the form of brilliant colors that appeared in people born with strong mana, making them easy to perceive. Those colors generally appeared in hair and eyes but occasionally affected skin as well. The colors were entirely different from those that children inherited from their parents. In fact, the brilliant hues were of a sort that people didn't naturally have in general. That was the phenomenon known as mana traits. The merfolk that Dale offered as an example were a race that specialized in water mana. They primarily lived in the water, and thanks to their racial traits, they were able to breathe under it as well. As a race in which mana traits often appeared, many of them had brilliant green or blue hair. Devils were also a race in which mana traits frequently manifested. All that said, it wasn't as if everyone with strong mana had a mana trait. The ratio also varied greatly by race. For devils, they were not particularly uncommon, whereas humans were rarely born with them. She's called the Rose Princess, but she's just the daughter of a regional lord. Her family isn't actually all that high up there in terms of social class. It's a pretty color, isn't it? Her eye color should be a mana trait too. An indigo blue, the symbol of the god her divine protection comes from. She's a high-ranking Neely priestess. You know a lot about her, Dale. She's an acquaintance of a friend of mine, so I've heard a lot about her. The image of his overly serious friend came to mind. In the depths of his heart, Dale decided that when they next met, he'd tease him thoroughly on the matter. At any rate, you know your own amount of mana, Latina. Latina doesn't know the exact amount. But you see, Rag was really good at magic. He didn't have a lot of mana, though. Rag taught Latina that she was the same way. Rag was the name of her father. Had she inherited her excellent mana control from him? That may be the case. I mean, no matter how clever she may have been, even before she met me, she'd already been taught healing magic and the basics of mana control. Latina had never explicitly said it, but Dale figured her magic teacher had been her father. She'd said that when she was young, she didn't have much contact with anyone outside of her family, and from what she occasionally told Dale, he sensed that she had been quite close to Rag. He'd likely been a great man. So there was someone with a mana trait even in your home village, Latina? What were they like? Dale asked casually, remembering what Latina had said earlier. Purple hair, Latina responded with a sigh, a mature, peaceful expression on her face. She had beautiful, lovely purple hair. She seemed like she was looking at something far away. I've heard of the Rose Princess. She's got strong divine protection from Neely and is supposed to even be able to heal the sort of serious injuries that normal healing magic can't handle, said Sylvia enthusiastically after Latina me. NTIONED. She'd seen the Rose Princess. Latina and Chloe nodded along. Must be nice. I wish I could go on a journey too. Chloe and Latina exchanged strained smiles at Sylvia's absent-minded muttering. This was how things always were. Feeling like she'd truly returned to where she belonged, Latina let out a little tee-hee. That was when a loud, hysteric voice rang out through the classroom. Latina. You're back. The owner of the voice stood stock still, unable to hide the surprise and delight on his face. Long time no see, Rudy. Yeah? Latina, when did you get back? The teacher's here, so we'll talk later. Latina smiled when she said that, but there was thick tension and a large distance between them. Furthermore, when Rudy stiffened up at her response, the other children couldn't hold back their laughter any further. He really wasn't good at dealing with things. In more ways than one.